We realize that we will never be able to go back to life pre-COVID-19. We have to live with this risk. Privacy is a very important human right, but it is not an absolute right.
Have you sacrificed calls to improve human rights in order to keep the dialogue going?
Well, you keep saying concerned. We're not concerned.
South Korea has been hailed as a model country in bringing its coronavirus infection rate under control. But the methods have raised privacy and public shaming concerns, and now there are reports that the virus is back again. My guest this week is South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-wha. Has her government made too many compromises on citizens' privacy in its efforts to contain the pandemic? And how could the public health crisis impact diplomacy in the region and beyond, especially with its nuclear neighbor to the north? Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-wha, welcome to Conflict Zone.
Thank you for having me.
Your country has reported a flare-up in coronavirus cases this week around the capital at a number of nightclubs, which authorities are now temporarily closing. President Moon has warned a second wave is coming, whether now or in the future. This at a time when you were just starting to ease some pandemic restrictions. How concerned is your government over the threat of a second outbreak?
Very concerned, but we have been guarding against this possibility. This virus is very tricky. It spreads very fast, and it spreads silently. Asymptomatic people can be contagious. So we've been guarding against this possibility. It's very unfortunate that this has happened, but our system is now fully up and running to trace, to test, and of course to treat the confirmed patients. This is a population that we have been concerned about all along. Young people, nighttime clubs where lots of people gather, and evidently where the sanitary rules were not strictly abided by. They were instructed to keep a close list of all the visitors, to take all precautions, but it turns out that these measures weren't adhered to. And now we are dealing with a huge population that need to be traced and tested.
So given that, I mean, you initially managed to come to grips with the pandemic through without any extensive lockdowns, we have to see, which we saw elsewhere. You said in a recent interview that you didn't think the idea of a lockdown or a blockade would be acceptable to your public, that this idea of a mandatory blockade would really be contradictory to the principle of openness. Do you think that you might have to rethink that policy in the face of the second wave?
Well, I think the measures that we have taken in the immediate aftermath of this outbreak is closure of these entertainment facilities, and these are by city administrative decree here in Seoul and in other big cities as well. So it is a temporary shutdown of these entertainment establishments. It is not a wholesale lockdown of businesses, and I don't think we will ever get to that point. We are racing against time in tracking down all the close contacts of people who have been to these establishments during this particular period, which was a long holiday, just before we were hoping to go to an easier form of social distancing. And we have gone into that for the rest of society, what that we call distancing in everyday life. And this means that we realize that we will never be able to go back to life pre-COVID-19. We have to live with this risk and be prepared when it raises its head again. Obviously, this time it has raised its head in big numbers, but I think we are prepared, and we are doing our very best to contain this outbreak.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the measures that your public is also living with. The recent flare-up in cases, it's further highlighted some glaring privacy issues with the track and trace methods that you're using to contain the pandemic. Enough details are being released to the public where people's whereabouts, their identities are being revealed. And I'd like to bring up this example because it's been reported that one of the recent coronavirus cases was a man who attended clubs in Seoul's gay district. Now, rights groups fear that, efforts are going to be made to forcibly out gay people who came in contact with him. Does it highlight a major failure in privacy protections?
I think the issue of privacy has been taken out of context. The issue of privacy is with certainly the patients, and I think we do this by law. Privacy is a very important human right, but it is not an absolute right. I think the ICCPR makes this very clear that it can be restricted, but it has to be restricted in accordance with the law. We have a very robust legal system in place where it's clearly identified as to where these rights might be restricted. And when you balance the privacy of the patients against the public's need to be protected from this risk, I think the answer is very clear. So the problem is,
so it's okay
you don't
for
do
you
this arbitrarily,
that
you do it by law.
It's okay for you that some social media users, they've already posted video footage of some of the gay bars and clubs urging followers for donations to, quote, help put a stop to these disgusting going-ons. That's an acceptable practice?
It is not okay. It is not okay. I think discrimination, prejudice against people for who they are is unacceptable for a country that is committed on the fundamental values of human rights that undergirds our democracy. It is not acceptable. But I think this is what the government is guarding against, that, we don't have a consensus on the rights of the sexual minorities and people with various gender identities. We don't have a consensus. We acknowledge that. But the changes take time, and I think pushing for changes too prematurely can create a backlash that is even more harmful. But here we are faced with this challenge, and the government response is very careful about not aggravating those existing prejudices. And we're hoping that through this experience, we will dispel a lot of the prejudice and discrimination that the sexual minorities are faced with. Going to clubs is not just people with different sexual identities. It's everybody going to these clubs. So we're tracking down everybody that have been involved in the club activities during this holiday time.
But it's not just clubs. It's not just LGBT communities. I mean, I'd like to just ask you about the environment that this is creating in your society, because a recent study found that citizens are more afraid of being socially shamed, for example, for having or spreading the virus, than they are of the disease itself. So what does that say about the environment that these measures have created in society right now?
I think our measures have been open, more open than many of the measures that other societies have taken. Obviously, in the situation of crisis, people have stress issues to deal with. There is a psychological element that this crisis has created that all societies have to face. We are trying to face that with the best of our expertise in terms of the psychological counseling that we provide to our citizens and anybody who is in need. We have a system, obviously, that may not be enough, but I think we have a system and we are dealing with it. And I think this is a challenge not just for us, but for all countries. And I think the COVID-19 has also made clear that there are hidden spots, blind spots in society that are revealed when a crisis comes along like this. We have some of our dark spots as well. For example,
and you'll address
we have
those?
Something like 400,000. Yes, we are. And this is not just government's efforts alone, because there's a limitation as to how far the government's efforts can reach. We enlist a great deal of support from our civil society groups who are helping, for example, undocumented workers, who are helping the sexual minority groups as well. We are enlisting their help so that people can come forward feeling safe to undergo testing and treatment.
Okay. So we talked about democratic values. We talked about the balance between privacy and public health, as you've articulated there. I'd like to speak now about the dictatorship to the north. First of all, in the past weeks, a lot of speculation about leader Kim Jong-un's health recently. Your intelligence has said that there were no signs that he had surgery. How sick was he, or is he?
Well, our intelligence is robust, and we share and analyze a great deal together with our ally, the United States. And all indications we have is that there is no unusual activity, whether it's his health or the society as a whole. Obviously, there's a limitation because it's a closed society. Information is very difficult to garner, but to the extent that we know, we don't detect any unusual developments.
It's a closed society that your administration has been making major efforts to crack open. Since President Moon took office in 2017, your government has stressed improving ties with the North in the hopes of promoting peace on the peninsula. But you've been criticized over not putting human rights high enough up on the agenda. For example, you dropped the traditional co-sponsoring of a resolution condemning North Korea's horrific rights record at the UN General Assembly this past fall. President Moon also did not bring up human rights in a meeting with Kim Jong-un last year. Have you sacrificed calls to improve human rights in order to keep the dialogue going?
I think keeping the dialogue going is extremely important if we are going to find a peaceful resolution with the North Korean nuclear and missiles issue and getting us on track towards creating lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula. Human rights is a very big issue when it comes to North Korea, and we support the international efforts, the UN efforts in this regard. Obviously, to keep the engagement going, we have to balance everything, and it's a decision given all the consideration, the judgments that we make. It's not that we don't consider a human rights issue of North Korea any less, but in the tactics and the strategy in promoting the engagement with North Korea has to weigh all factors and proceed.
But there's a critical mass of criticism, and I'd just like to highlight a couple of them because the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea has said the following: integrating fundamental human rights into the current negotiations is crucial for the sustainability of any agreement for denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula and beyond. Can you really wait to talk tough on human rights with North Korea? I mean, doesn't that undermine the legitimacy of your efforts?
I don't think so. I think human rights has a place, and I think the human rights mechanisms of the United States, the United Nations, plays a very important role in keeping the engagement on that track. But there's another track to engagement with North Korea, which is the peace and security track. And at some point, they have to come together. But at this time, our judgment is that the security track has to take precedence.
You've also been heavily criticized as you are prioritizing that security track of turning a blind eye in another way. Back in November, your country deported 2 fishermen accused of murder back to North Korea. The UN, again, expressing deep concern that, quote, the decision was made potentially without due process, and that the 2 men are at risk of serious human rights violations upon return. And they just highlight a couple, including enforced disappearance, arbitrary execution, torture, ill treatment, trials that do not conform to international fair trial standards. They say that your government could have failed to uphold international human rights obligations itself. Do you regret that deportation decision?
No, not at all. I think we made the best decision under the circumstances, and given that there was no genuineness to the 2 men's desire to come to this part of the peninsula, and given that
how did you determine
they themselves have. Well, we have a process run by our National Security Office, and all the ministries are involved, and the collective decision was that they pose a danger to our society, and so therefore the decision was made.
Doesn't it really come down to the fact that you're afraid that any position that you take on human rights will simply blow up talks with the North?
We are not afraid. We are very actively seeking the engagement, taking all elements into consideration. But I think even the human rights mechanisms would say that it is very important to keep that engagement going.
Okay. I'd also like to talk about the circumstances currently in the north. I mean, we highlighted a number of the dire circumstances when it came to the case of those two fishermen. We also have signs of deterioration there. The country has had a poor harvest season. Now with coronavirus, there are destabilizing factors, both economically, potentially on the health front as well. How concerned are you that the North, with its strongman policy, will lash out and deflect from the interior issues that it has in the country?
Well, we watch very carefully. I think, the official position is that there is no case of coronavirus, but they report to the WHO of quarantining people and testing. So we take their official position with a lot of grain of salt. The health structure there is extremely weak. We have offered to collaborate on this front. We have not received a response yet, but I would be cautious as to make sweeping judgments about what the situation there overall is.
But are you preparing for the potential of increased provocations?
They have provoked. There has been a series of short-range launches, and these are certainly unhelpful, and we have urged them to stop this at a time when the whole world are trying to come to grips with this very unprecedented health crisis. But we watch very closely, and we are prepared, and I think based upon our very robust defense posture and readiness, based upon our strong U.S. ROK security alliance.
Let's talk a little bit more about that alliance and your readiness to face any potential threat from the North. You've mentioned that they've already provoked. You have actually been trimming back on some joint military exercises in an effort to engage the Kim regime in dialogue. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace has said the following about that paring back. Canceling crucial exercises detracts from Seoul's very ability to manage the threatening neighbor it has been engaging with by downgrading South Korea's military readiness and compromising its ability to conduct operations with U.S. forces. Aren't you concerned that you might not be ready if Kim lashes out?
I have full confidence in our military authorities in collaboration with the U.S. military authorities to keep up that robust preparedness, despite the reconstruction of the exercises. That is done to support the diplomatic track, certainly, but all the while making sure that the preparedness is not in any way undermined.
But it doesn't help, certainly, that your relations with the United States are not as good as they once were. You're currently at odds over the defense cost sharing. The U.S. has rejected your offer of a 13% increase in spending and instead is demanding a 5-fold increase. How do you want to come to an agreement, and what happens if you don't?
Difficult, I admit, but this is an alliance that's developed over 67 years. There have been difficult issues in the past that we've been able to work through. Allies have differences, and I think the special measures agreement this time is particularly difficult. But we are both determined to find an agreement that we both can agree to. Obviously, it will take more time and more effort, but we are, I'm very confident that we will reach an agreement eventually.
Donald Trump has said the following. It's a question of whether South Korea will contribute toward the defense of their own nation. We are defending nations that are very wealthy. South Korea is a very wealthy nation. Does he have a point?
We are increasingly wealthy, which is why our share of the stationing of the troops have increased over the years. Initially, the initial agreement is that we will provide the land and the facilities, and the U.S. will provide for the expenses of the troops stationing. Now, as Korea developed and became more wealthy, we have agreed to a special measures agreement, which is the title of this agreement, and increasingly more of that share, and with that share, that increase has to be incremental. It can't be 30%, 50% over a one-year period. There is a methodology system. There is a budgetary system that our government has to follow. And in the end, this has to go through the National Assembly for approvals. So there are all these parameters that we as government needs to meet while negotiating with the United States. And I think our partners across the table from the United States are fully aware of this.
And as you're sorting through those parameters, we have the U.S. president not missing one opportunity to say what a great relationship he has with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and what a nice guy he is. Trump has said the following: "We fell in love. No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters." Are you concerned that Trump is speaking in such high terms about the dictator to the north and not about the democratically elected president of South Korea? I mean, you're longtime allies.
Well, you keep saying concerned. We're not concerned. I think the relations between our two governments at all levels, between the president, between myself and the Secretary of State, is very strong, very tight. And I think in particular during this time of the COVID-19 crisis, the collaboration has been exemplary. So I'm not concerned. I think that's President Trump's unique way of messaging. And it also indicates his clear desire to continue to engage at that level. The engagement with North Korea this time around has been driven very much by that top-level political will, both on the side of the United States and also to a certain extent on the part of our side as well. So, and it's very important to keep that high-level political will going for the continued engagement.
What other options you have if that if that alliance breaks down? I mean, have you become too reliant on the U.S. nuclear shield that they provide?
I am not at all concerned about. I don't think that's a scenario that we anticipate. I think the alliance is very strong. The U.S. is fully committed to this the security of the South Korea and the extension of their nuclear shield. So I don't know where you get that the possibility of that happening. I don't see that possibility.
Let's talk about China, because in the meantime, China has been using the coronavirus crisis as an opportunity to assert itself in the region. There's been an arrest, the arrest of democracy activists in Hong Kong, military pressure being put on Taiwan and its neighbors in the South China Sea, even going so far as to sink a Vietnamese fishing vessel. It looks like China is using the coronavirus pandemic as a regional power grab while other major powers are busy at home. Surely that must raise some red flags for you.
Well, China and we had our difficult time in 2016, 2017. Post my president's visit in December 2017, I think we are largely recovering the close economic and people-to-people ties. As far as the Corona-19 virus is concerned, it first happened in China. And we were one of the first to be hit because we have lots of people traveling from back and forth to China. And I think the collaboration on the COVID-19 has been very good. We press for quick and prompt sharing of information. We underscore the importance of that, and we demonstrate that with our own actions, and we urge that on the part of China as well.
We have economies under pressure right now amid this pandemic, citizens' health at stake. What do you think your part of the world will look like after this pandemic ends?
I think post-coronavirus, the world will certainly be different from pre-COVID-19. I think all economies have been severely hit by this. We are rolling out domestic economic stimulus packages for our strategic industries, for our small and medium businesses, for furloughed workers, for households. But that can only go to a certain extent. We are very dependent on our trade, our investment ties with overseas. So we very much hope that that also recovers. And we can't do that by ourselves. So I do hope that our partners will also see the self-interest in recovering the global value chains, the trade and investments, the business trips. And I think there's two trends. I think, yes, there are tendencies of countries to become insular and shutting of the doors and parochial. But I think there's also an understanding that, and the virus has made this so clear, that these challenges are cross-border. It doesn't stop at the border. You may close the border, but the virus still gets in. And so there's a increasing call for global coordination at various fora, at the UN, at the WHO, at the G20. And we do hope that beyond the talk, that there will be greater multilateral collaboration in overcoming not just the health crisis, but also the socioeconomic crisis as well.
South Korean Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-wha, thank you for joining us on Conflict Zone.
Thank you.